Hey everyone. All right, more sleep today. Um, we'll finish up waking up. Let me pull up the slides. Okay. We'll finish up waking up today, and then on Friday, we'll talk about sleep pressure, what's going to send us into slumber, and and then we'll talk a little bit about mostly, pineal gland and adenosine. We'll talk about caffeine and its effects, opposing adenosine, and what delays our tumble into bed, and what promotes it. And if we have time on Friday, we'll talk about actual sleep and the stages of sleep too. And then on Monday, we'll start talking about some of the interesting things, some applications, some problems with. We might go through Wednesday. It might take 5 total lectures to go through the sleep, and I don't know. We'll get there. We'll see. Let me pull up the chat box. So this is supposed to be Little Nemo, the Dream Master. Little Nemo's Adventures in Slumberland. Or maybe that's Flip the Frog, whatever, from Little Nemo. So the circadian effects of light and non-photon, right? You're not out in the sunlight, out in, beauty rays or whatever. You're just exercising, you're eating, you're doing sociable things, non-photic stimuli, not nearly as important as light, but we do have our own. Remember, we have our own circadian rhythm. All things sleep. If you're a living thing and your life is longer than the course of a day, you have a circadian rhythm and a sleep schedule. I mean, we have this. This is really foundational to life, to survival, and nobody knows when this entered existence, but potentially the first ever living thing was a sleeper. And that seems at least feasible, if not entirely likely. It actually seems very likely. But whatever people say, oh, they don't sleep, they're just up forever. And when we say this about people, technically, there are genes that can protect us. So if you're getting, say, 6 hours of sleep a night, there is a very rare genetic constitution that is not particularly affected by that. But that's none of us. That's you listen to the odds of the number of people who have this, and the comparisons are drawn that, like, oh, there's more people are struck by lightning than have this genetic constitution that has sort of a protective built-in, kind of a protective suit against sleep deprivations, detriments. But some animals sleep a lot. You get into the possum, an armadillo. I mean, these things really just go at it. I mean, you think your house cat sleeps a lot. I mean, these things are going 18 hours a day. And we don't really have a good explanation for the differences in sleep requirements. The giraffe, maybe it's sleeping 4 or 5 hours a night, something like that. But is it in the nutrition? We have carnivores and we have herbivores. Is it in the danger of its environment? Is it in other characteristics of environment, aquatic versus land? Is it the complexity of a nervous system? What constitutes the amount of sleep need? I don't know. But if you're a baby, there's some interesting data on whales as a baby. They sort of go through this sleep deprivation migration phase right away. But pretty much everything else, you're an infant and you just sleep. You just need as much as you can get in that developmental stage. Now, remember, circadian, I don't know what the hell that means, but diem means a day. So a circadian rhythm would be about a day, and we just, there's no use. There's no use. And then eventually you see it, this very common word, in the last 70 years or so, it became a very common word, but we'll talk about its origin, the origin of that word today. And then diurnal. Remember diurnal, we're diurnal. Unless you're Nathaniel for periods where you have night shift that you go work through the night, and so we a lot of people have shift work. It's a surprising number, but the graveyard or kind of shift work where you work through the night. Nurses, uh, law enforcement. I don't know, firefighters. I mean, there's tons of jobs that insist that the nighttime hours be occupied. But we're a diurnal species. We have wake and sleep cycles that are based on the sun. We have this day where we're circadian, right? We have this about a day internal clock, and ours is based on the sun in terms of light. Gets us out of bed in the morning. We're eating, we're verbing, right? We're doing our activities, our food, gathering and whatever during these daylight hours. We're energized during the day and sort of depressed into slumber at night. We're a diurnal species. Now, remember plants too. It's not just a bunch of, pedal folks, bi and quadrupedal folks that have these circadian rhythms. Plants put them in complete darkness, and they have endogenous clocks. They will still go through their heliotropism, their circadian rhythms are tracking the sun with no access to the sun. There's internal biology that is responsible for this stuff. Now with us, there's a lot of circadian variation. Some people are night owls. Some people have this very delayed sleep phase. You see DSP down here, delayed sleep phase. They go to bed, I don't know, some of you probably, a lot of people, you go to bed at 2, 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, it's about to get light out and you're just getting into bed. Oh shit, the sun's up, I better go to bed. Is that sort of circadian rhythm? And it's difficult. And we're going to talk about this later when we're talking about consequences of enforced sleep schedules. So I don't know, Monday maybe we'll get to this, but there's genetic variation. It's not just people being lazy or being unwilling to go to bed. It's not like, little kids are like, go to your room, go to bed. And like, but I'm not tired or whatever. There's actual biology here. It would be the equivalent. Like, let's say you are exhausted at 10 p.m. and you're asleep by 10:14 p.m., something like that. But at 7 p.m. or 6 p.m., can you go to bed? I guess you could go just lie in bed and like, just be really antsy and sort of toss. I don't know what that means, and turn and stuff, and you're sort of rolling around in bed, and but like that's the same thing as telling, I don't know, a 15-year-old to go to bed at 10 p.m. or somebody who's a night owl or has a delayed sleep schedule, delayed sleep phase, to go to bed at 10 o'clock. It's like telling, I don't know, if you go to bed at 10, telling you to go to bed at 6 or something. It just doesn't make sense. But again, think of and I mean, I see this as a morning lark, right? I'm the lark up here. I this morning I got up at like 4:10 or something. I didn't mean to. I hated that, but that was a little early for me. But in tribal societies, right, this person might be lookout, very late at night. This person over here very early in the morning, late out, if they all have a different biological clock, a different biologically programmed in their DNA sleep schedule, then the camp is going to be very vigilantly watched. Predators are not going to be able to sneak past those eyeballs. But policy, at least in the US and probably worldwide, certainly in the US, we favor the larks, right? We favor those early early to bed, early to rise folks. And this is not an age at which pretty much anybody is early to bed, early to rise biologically. And so this is what we talked about last time. Remember, we did the circadian rhythms, and they said, okay, let's really do light stimulus and food and exercise next time. But the cuckoo clock, our circadian rhythm, that is just, it's built in, just like the heliotropism of a plant. We have our own biological clock that deny light. We still follow the sun. Now, part of this is cortisol and epinephrine, especially cortisol, the urge to get out of bed in the morning, this necessity to get up and move. Cortisol is released in the morning. That's when it's going to peak. If you're going to get blood values of cortisol, your stress hormone, the HPA axis from your adrenal cortex, it's going to be up right after waking, right? You just immediately when you wake, that thing is up. Let's get out of bed. Let's go do stuff. Let's get some food acquisition underway. Let's go acquire some water and build a fortress or whatever. And then cortisol starts to fall a little bit. But cortisol is implicated in the adrenal clock machinery, right? And playing this role. It's a two-way road of the suprachiasmatic nucleus, SCN, suprachiasmatic nucleus, and cortisol. And so cortisol is giving us this tendency to rise, and it's helping set that clock so that the pineal gland or pineal gland is going to release its melatonin later in the night. You're helping establish that clock, but also suprachiasmatic nucleus is telling the adrenal cortex, like, okay, let me program, let me regulate you, so you release your cortisol, and then that cortisol can help program sleep later in the day. Everything is sort of setting timers, but that timer is regulated by the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Now here's the epinephrine look. Norepi doesn't have a very pronounced difference. Norepi, not a very pronounced. Remember, this is the neurotransmitter. Epinephrine, you'll get epinephrine in the brain. You'll get epinephrine in the blood from your adrenal gland. But epinephrine, you'll get a little bit of norepi from your adrenal gland too. But norepi this is your neurotransmitter almost entirely, and this is your endocrine. This is, let's squirt this out into the blood and circulate it around. Epi is another charge to get out of bed. So you see upon awakening and sleep onset, it goes down. Now I'm going to talk more about this stuff as we do the actual sleep cycles, non-REM and REM sleep, and what happens during REM sleep, the actual paralysis. We'll talk about that. But again, glucocorticoids, cortisol, cortex, the adrenal cortex, glucocorticoids, cortisol. And so we have this synchronizing effect of cortisol on our clocks. Again, two-way road. It is helping us. That cortisol is setting a timer for the pineal gland to release its sleep sauce, its melatonin later, but also it is being influenced. Cortisol release is being influenced. So there's the glucocorticoids potentiate nocturnal melatonin synthesis. So this is setting that clock, but also glucocorticoids are under control of the suprachiasmatic nucleus, is exerting some action. So two-way road. We have an internal clock that doesn't care about the external environment. Okay, it cares about the external environment, but if there is no external environment, if there is no sunlight, you're hiding in a cave with remarkably little light. You're in Kentucky and you're in a cave that has, the Mammoth Cave, and it has no light in there. You're still going to go through your cuckoo clocking, right? Your circadian rhythm. Those rhythms are still going to go. Okay, so today we'll do the light stimulus. I'm outside, the light is beaming into my eyes and making it hard for me to see the screen. And then nonphotic wakefulness, because sleep and wakefulness are the inverse of each other. You don't want to get the two a little too friendly. You want to have really uh, distinct phases where when you're in bed, you're not wakeful. You're actually sleeping when you're in bed. You get into bed and you're not rolling around and agitated and your mind is racing and you're all hot and sweaty and you're looking at your alarm clock and you're wondering if you got to get up to eat, you have to pee. You don't want to do that when you're in bed. You want to get into bed and actually just depart from the world. You don't exist anymore. You go into a complete coma until morning happens. You're like, whoa, what happened? I was hallucinating. It feels like a minute went by. I'm awake, whatever. And then like I set my snooze button and it felt like an hour went by and it was only 5 minutes. And like you sort of completely lose track of time. You have no way. Your body actually keeps track of time very effectively, but it doesn't let you in on the counting. It doesn't let you in on that tabulation. It doesn't let your conscious mind um, be apprised of, be aware of the passage of time. But everyone has had this experience where, set your mind to it. What time do you want to get up in the morning? Oh shit, I gotta get up at 6 o'clock. I have a flight, or I have a job interview, or I have I have a final at 6 a.m. I don't know why you'd have a final at 6, and you're like panicked that you're going to sleep through your alarm, right? So you set 6 alarms. You set like a Fitbit alarm and a cell phone alarm, and like you set your microwave timer to like for 7 hours or something, and that'll go on your stove timer, and you have someone give you a call in the morning. You have like 6 things that are going to get you out of bed in the morning, that are going to get you out of bed at like 5:52, and then you just wake up at 5:51 and you look over like, oh, I woke up right on time. We have this internal, and everyone I think has had this experience. It's not rare. If you haven't had it, you're the exception. um, and so our body does a pretty good job at monitoring the passage of time in a stressful way, but it doesn't let us in on the calculations, because you go to bed and you fall asleep and you dream, and you're like, you wake up and you have no idea how much time was that. Half an hour? Was that 5 hours? Was that a minute? I have no idea how long I was asleep. And so there's a weird understanding of time when you go to sleep, but we'll get there. We'll get there. For now, we're still waking up. We get out of bed and we want to distance ourselves from sleep as much as we can. We get out of bed and we don't want to carry our slumber into the day. Now, some people do. If you get out of bed at 8 a.m. and it's like 11 before you can use your brain, and you've had 6 cups of coffee, okay, you have a problem. Right now, this, you're not alone, right? That problem is shared by about half of all, at least, Californians. But there are remedies for this, and that's not how life is supposed to go. You shouldn't be dependent on coffee and Red Bull and whatever, to just be a human being and get out of bed and be able to start undergoing your day's work. So light stimulus is going to be a big part of this. We will end the semester with strategies, with tips. Our last lecture of the semester is going to be, here's what you do to make your life infinitely better. Like, here's some of the best stuff that you can possibly incorporate into your life to be a better athlete, to be a smarter person, to live longer, to ward off disease, to ward off depression. It's the most useful advice that I could possibly give anybody for anything, is going to be our last lecture. GP, Red Bull and coffee. That's breakfast. To get to I don't know, exonerate yourself from slumber, or whatever, those shackles of sleep. There's better ways of doing this. Light is one of the most effective ways. So I keep referring to the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Here's your eyeballs, right? These are your eyeballs. We're looking at, this is from the top, looking down on a head that's been cut in half, and we have the optic chiasm. So this is where it crosses. Just means like a crossing, a chiasm, a crossing. Now, your visual field over here, your right visual field, is being interpreted, processed by your left hemisphere, and vice versa. This eyeball's visual field over here is being interpreted. And there's some really interesting stuff. If you've ever read The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, Oliver Sacks. You sever the corpus callosum, and you start to see these very fascinating case studies. At some point in life, you're not at a point right now where academic pleasure reading is a thing, because anything that's forced upon you is inherently unpleasurable. It is unsatisfying, and it arouses like anhedonia, right? The inability to experience pleasure. But at some point in life, Oliver Sacks, read some of his stuff, and The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat is a wonderful one. And you show one eyeball instructions, but not the other eyeball, and you show this eyeball something else. And if the hemispheres aren't communicating with each other, you get hilarious explanations of what we're doing. Of why did you just do that? Well, and then we rationalize our decisions that are like totally false. We're just trying to justify our behaviors. Just like when somebody's standing on first base, right? They just got a base hit. And you ask them, like, how'd you do? Well, I saw where the pitch was going. No, you didn't. That's not how life works. That's not how brains work. That's not how visual processing works. That's not how motor coordination works. Your body just did it. And then you found yourself on first base inventing a narrative of how the hell you got there. That's what happened. Um, Again, read Oliver Sacks at some point, but don't do it now, because it's hard to appreciate anything when it's forced upon you. This is why you should never really pursue your passions for a career, because then it will remove any passion you once had for it. Science is cold and calculated, and you can do that for a living without really choking the life out of it. But if you are genuinely passionate about a field, whether it's in the arts or something like that, don't do that for a career, because you'll hate it. It'll become mechanical and businessy. Genevieve, sorry. um, you don't need to take anything I say as gospel, as some sort of foundational instruction that cannot be overturned. Whatever, live your own life. Go do whatever the hell you want to do. And Courtney's advice be damned. I'm totally happy with that. This is just what I've learned along the way. What applies to me might not apply to everybody. So, suprachiasmatic nucleus. This definitely applies to everybody. My little like in passing wisdoms that I try to impart for no reason, that doesn't apply to everybody. But the suprachiasmatic nucleus does. And so we have the optic chiasm where this stuff crosses, right? Supra, think supraspinatus. Where's that? Well, it's like above the spinous process or whatever, above supra. Um, and so the suprachiasmatic nucleus lives right above that thing, right? It lives supra the chiasm. And so this is where you're going to see it's part of the hypothalamus, right? And so there's the optic nerve, optic chiasm right there. And then the suprachiasmatic nucleus is right above the optic chiasm. So that's where this thing lives. If you just follow your eyes back and remember, um, your optic nerve. I mean, this is brain. This is not all of your brain is inside of your brain. Right? This is pretty far outside of your brain, and it just goes right in there. And so this is sort of an extra brain geography, like a satellite campus of your brain. Is the optic nerves. And so these things just go back, and right above here we have our suprachiasmatic nucleus. And what a perfect destination to receive sensory information, to receive light information from the eyeballs. Where does light come in? Well, the eyeballs. Close your eyes. You're still getting some light. There's still a visual field when your eyes are closed. Just do one of those meditation apps and say, stare openly into your visual field. Notice that there's still this empty space, almost like a star field. Hopefully it's not like flashing and blinking and stuff. But there's still a visual field with your eyes closed, especially in the daytime. Now, if you're in the, under the covers with like blankets over your head and your eyes are closed and stuff. Okay, well now it's just pretty black wherever you look, but there's still a visual field. But your eyes are where you are receiving all of this light information. So what better place to have a suprachiasmatic nucleus than right above those nerves? But these intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. I might say this, for the rest of the lecture. I might say this little like RGCs, IPRGCs, but this is what I'm talking about. You have a lot of these retinal ganglion cells. I mean, it's like, tons of these things. But what we think of, what we've learned in biology classes before today, is rods and cones. Okay, here's a bunch of cones. 4.6 million cones, and the average retina has 92 million rods. And we all know this stuff. If you had high school bio or basic physio here on campus or something, rods, you're not seeing color. This is at nighttime, you're shades of gray, and you're picking up these sort of, night vision stuff. And the cones, you're getting some color here, but you also have these retinal ganglion cells, these intrinsically photoreceptive retinal ganglion cells, and they don't sense color. I say or visualize images and put it in italics and in like a brown font, so that if you have cones, you can tell the brown font, because this might not be entirely true, this little part, but it's basically true-ish. And it's practically true for all practical purposes. Let's just say this is true. But what this stuff is doing, the purpose of these things is to calibrate our circadian rhythms. Now we know what the circadian rhythm is. We get out of bed in the morning, we go to bed at night. We're diurnal species, except again, Nathaniel et al. If you're working a night shift, then we have some differences. And I will talk exactly about night shifts probably on Monday. But here's your optic nerve, the fiber, right? Here's your optic nerve. Okay, your optic nerve. We're picking up this information over here. Okay, we have a retina, right? Here's the optic nerve. We're picking up information. You see the rods, you see the cones, but remember, we have these too. What are these things sensing? Light information. They're sensing light information to tell our brain, to inform our suprachiasmatic nucleus that, hey, it's sunup. We should get up too, because we're a diurnal species. Why don't we get the hell out of bed? I'm just looking at the chat box. Genevieve, ignoring you from here on out. I think you probably should. And I say that sincerely. I think you should essentially hear people, hear the words they say, and say, nah, no thanks. I'm going to do my thing. I really think that's how society would be so much better. The political parties and all this stuff, I think they're all a joke. And I think we're all need to just be thinking creatures. I think we all need to use our brains for, higher thinking and make our own decisions. Now, that is, again, information you can ignore from here on out. But I'm just saying I agree with you. And I think that's a wonderful decision. Okay, here's why I put melanopsin expressing, right? So this is that same thing I was just talking about. The retinal ganglion cells, these photoreceptive retina, it's called different things sometimes. And so that's what we're talking about, and looking at this visual, the spatial vision that sometimes these little guys have been implicated in. Maybe there's a component of visualization. We're coming up with spatial recognition and stuff that this is a little bit involved in. A little bit involved. It's not all just them rods and cones, right? Maybe this does have a little bit more of a role than telling our brains, hey, you're a diurnal creature. It's time for you to get out of bed. Rise and shine, cockadoodledoo. Maybe there's a little bit more to them, but what is the bulk of their function? The primary function of these things is cockadoodledoo. It's let's get you the hell out of bed. And this is so important because just think about evolutionary history. What can we rely on? Rain? No, we have no. There are dry spells, there are droughts, there are floods. They're just super inconsistent. Can we rely on um I don't know, any type of, the wind and the snows and what the hell can we rely on in nature? Animals and trees and whatever, pollens, we can't rely on anything. From year to year, it's just, what people would call a shit show. It's all over the place. We have no idea. But the sun, this goes up every single morning for as long as there's been a sun and an earth. That sun has been rising consistently every day. For as long as there's been a sun and an earth, that sun has been setting consistently every day. What better anchor for us to establish our entire lives on, our circadian rhythms, the most important shit we do, than the sun's rise and the sun's fall? And I mean, it's interesting, our the way we have distanced ourselves from it. Do you know? Like, I mean, I sleep terribly when I'm in. I try. I'm a bit of a furor with my slumber. I mean, I'm like, I really lay down the law with slumber and say, nope, now's the time I go to bed. Like, nothing interrupts this. And still, I don't sleep that well when I'm in California. And the times I sleep best ever, where I just feel like I'm a little child hitting my REM sleep for 9 hours a night. Um, when I go to Africa. I've done 3 trips, and I've on all 3 of those trips, the last time I slept that well, I was a fetus. And why is that? Well, the sun goes down at 6 p.m. and what am I supposed to do? I don't know, I can't see anything. There's sometimes, depending on where I am, there's very little electricity, and so wow, I'm just gonna go down with the sun, and I learned to sleep with the sun, and I'm getting 10 hours of actual sleep. The sun comes up and cockadoodle-doo stuff. Um, or it's like a cow giving birth. It sounds like something out of Jurassic Park, like a moaning, stegosaurus or whatever. It's, oh, that's just a cow giving birth next door. Uh, and um, but like, what, it's the sun comes up and I get up and I'm getting 10 hours of sleep every night, and then I come to California and everything obstructs it. We're not compatible with the sun. But it's unsurprising that we have evolved in such a way that we are so programmed to be optimized and calibrated by the sunshine. Now, during this calibration, during this optimization, during this programming, we didn't have artificial lights. Now, we had candles, we had campfires. There was a moon upstairs in the night sky. There's stars in the night sky. Interestingly, none of those things fuck us up for sleep at night. What messes us up is an iPhone. The moon doesn't. Like, go look at the moon. I mean, maybe it's like a super bright moon and there's some weird phenomenon, and it's like there's somebody installed mirrors on the moon or what, um, or the campfire is 20 feet tall. Okay, so there are some exceptions. I'm not laying down sort of, absolute laws here, but candlelight, a fireplace, the moonlight, starlight, these things do not obstruct our circadian rhythms. We were evolving with those things. So it's really fascinating phenomena when we get there. So remember, intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. The retinohypothalamic tract, these things go to the suprachiasmatic nucleus right here. Retinohypothalamic tract, suprachiasmatic nucleus. Now, the pineal gland, that's going to be a major subject for Friday. We're going to talk about that and our release of melatonin, and let's get us ready for slumber. And we'll talk on the last day when I'm giving advice, and here's the best, I don't know, 30 sentences I'll ever say to you. And we'll probably be in that lecture. If the most useful stuff I could say will probably appear in that lecture, but that one is yet to come. So the retinohypothalamic tract, right? This is light information, which we are interpreting through these photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. Now, interestingly, the evolutionary narrative. Now, I wasn't there in. I'm not like I wasn't kind of wandering around in the Cambrian explosion, and so this is the best that science can offer, is that although sleep was probably, again, who the hell knows? Nobody knows, but there are some presumptions of science and pretty compelling evolutionary biology work that says sleep, that was probably introduced into kind of living creation once, and has since just overcome all creatures, and has been carried along as the baggage of life is sleep. Vision, though, likely developed independently in independent lines of and lineages. And some creatures, all they can do is just sense light, right? They don't have vision in the way that we have vision. Where you look at the tree and what do you see? I see a tree. But they have this retinal ganglion apparatus where there's like, okay, it's I have a diurnal or a nocturnal cycle and I can tell where the sun is. And so vision is a remarkable evolutionary um, kind of creation. I don't care whatever it's created, whatever it is, whatever your belief system. I am neither in agreement or opposed to. I say that sincerely. Whatever your belief system, sure, I'll hop on board. Um, but the evolutionary narrative is what a remarkable and remarkably diverse and remarkably repetitively introduced phenomenon. Now, every day we have to recalibrate our time zone. Not as much as Ross is doing now, or is just completed or whatever. Ross, when you listen to this, I don't know when you left. I think it was very recent. You may be overcoming jet lag sometime around now. Jet lag, a topic that is yet to come, but we have to update just the tiniest bit of error correction. This inherent jet lag of about 15 minutes, give or take. Everybody's going to be a little bit different, and some creatures are not like some creatures as in some people, whatever, but some species of life have much longer than 24-hour circadian rhythm, about a day rhythm. Some creatures have a shorter than 24-hour circadian rhythm. We tend to be a little bit longer, and I'm going to talk about that, but we have to update this all the time. We essentially wake up in the morning in a barely different time zone, and we, oh shit, that's right, that's when the sun comes up, and we have to adjust our time zone. Your iPhone is just, or your whatever, devices are just going to do it. I was in Utah over the weekend, this last weekend, and, I cross into Utah and my phone and my Fitbit just tell me that my time zone has changed. They just update. But did my suprachiasmatic nucleus automatically update as fast as my stuff, as my units, as my whatevers? No. It needed light stimulus. It needed to actually interpret the environment to reestablish a diurnal rhythm. Now, 1 hour you can really do in a day. Um, you don't necessarily want to, but you can do probably an hour a day of adjusting your time zone, which is why I said Ross is probably about now getting adjusted if he's on, let's just call it like a London time or whatever. I don't know, Ross, I don't know where the hell you are. So light is our calibration. This is how we constantly calibrate. Remember, there's non-photic, non-light calibrations as well, but not nearly as powerful. Nowhere even close to as powerful as light is at updating our biological clock, updating our 24-ish hour circadian rhythm. But some people don't live in California. Some people live in Alaska. Some people live in Scandinavia. And I just typed this in like 10 minutes before class. Daylight hours in Scandinavia in winter. In the depths of winter, the Stockholm area has only around 5.5 daylight hours, while in the north of Lapland, the sun peaks above the horizon just to give about 4 hours of twilight and almost 20 hours of complete darkness. Yikes, right? Hello, darkness, my old friend. That's the song. I think everybody knows the song. But we're really struggling here with our circadian clocks to get this. And so there's some techniques that you can incorporate. There's some stuff that you can do. People, if you're living in Alaska, you're like, well, I became a commercial fisherman, or well, I have a warrant out for my arrest in 6 states, but I still want to own a gun, so I'm going to go to Alaska. That's fine. You can do that. A really dear friend of mine did that. Couple of felonies. We're probably the smartest person I've ever met, this guy. And certainly the most talented visual artist I've ever met. One of the most talented musicians, one of the most brilliant minds I have ever encountered. And I had a couple of felonies. He moved to Alaska. He buys guns and whatever. I mean, I've never met like this person's equal in it. I mean, he's so smart that it's actually harmful if you're that smart. The world, he must be so lonely in the world that what else are you going to do but commit crimes and buy guns and stuff. I mean, I said all of that with there's nothing in jest that I just said. So but there's stuff you can do with light. You know, when he's up in Alaska and he's having these sort of polar darknesses, like, well, you better buy a light box, but the type of light matters. Don't go cheap here. The type of light matters, and it's these blue lights, it's these yellow lights that really can arouse you in the morning. But even without light, even if you're in Scandinavia, right, we're going to have this. We're going to have a cycle of melatonin, and melatonin is something we're going to talk about as we get into Friday's lecture. This graph comes from this book. I would recommend the whole world read this book. It's probably in everyone's language. Beautifully written, wonderful professor, and wonderful writing and information. So where did we get this idea of a circadian rhythm? University of Chicago. University of Chicago has a lot. I mean, not just this, a lot. Really, Nathaniel Kleitman is one of these major names, really foundational researcher in sleep studies. But a lot of these our understanding of sleep has come out of University of Chicago. So this isn't the last appearance of that university that's going to say our understanding of the human body and its rhythms and the importance of sleep and its roles and the characteristics of sleep and this isn't the last time this guy is going to come up in these lectures. So he was in his 40s, Nathaniel Kleitman, and he brought a graduate student with him, Bruce Richardson. He was in his 20s. And they packed up some supplies. You know, let's get some food in here. Let's be able to measure our temperature. Let's be able to measure sleep and wake. And they went into Kentucky, into this cave, the Mammoth Cave, and essentially no detectable sunlight is in there. And so what they were doing was the flower experiment. I think that the shame plant, I think it's also called, because you touch it and it just kind of recoils in shame. The mimosa. Anyway, so they did that experiment on themselves. And this is the first time this ever happened in a published way. The first time it's ever been documented. Maybe this happened, you know, in like, 200 BC and just nobody wrote it down. But the first known experiment where this happened, they went into this cave for 32 days. And the following year, 1939, Kleitman, he publishes his work, Sleep and Wakefulness. This is it. This is what he published, and he kind of chronicles his experience and talks about the experiments. And what they learned was that the body is not 24 hours. The circadian rhythm is not 24 hours. Now, Kleitman, remember, he was in his 40s, and his was close to 24 hours. It was a little bit over his circadian rhythm. That was a little bit over 24 hours, but about a diem with an M, about a day. The circadian rhythm, it's about a day. He was a little bit over 24 hours. His grad student in his 20s, Bruce Richardson, he was like 26 hours or something, 24 hours, or 28 hours, maybe something like that. He was several hours over, Bruce Richardson. I think he was averaging 26 to 28, something like that, for the amount of for a day, as the circadian rhythm for the guy in his 20s. But we've since gone forward. This is an article from Science in 1999. Lots of articles have looked at this. No shortage of articles. Here's one. So don't take this as the entirety of published literature on how long a circadian rhythm is, but the consensus in science, not science like this Science the magazine, but the consensus in the whole of science in experimentation is it might be around 24 hours and 15 minutes, something like that for the average human being. But remember, there's variation. Just like there's variation in diurnal cycles, there's variation here too. But different species are going to have different lengths of time. For people, for us, for our upright hominid bipedal humanoid folks, right? I don't know, a quarter past a day, not a quarter past a whole day, a quarter past the hour of 24 hours. That was a inarticulate way of saying it. You get what I'm saying. Now, the sun, this giant ball of fire, this is the single most important factor, the single most important synchronizing variable for your sleep and your wakefulness, for what sends you to bed and for what gets you out of bed in the morning, and for what establishes that difference, what separates those two forms, the Jekyll and the Hyde, right? The Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, where the Stevenson book, you guys know what that is, where there's like the monster and the doc. We should be a hallucinating sleeping species where we're just totally out of it and we're like psychotic for a while, and then we get out of bed and we snap out of it, and we should snap out of it kind of fast. There should be a pretty rapid snap out of it if we go about it correctly and we can separate ourselves from that. Science actually means like separate, means shit, really is what it means. Scantia means to separate oneself from ignorance, whatever, but it comes from separate yourself from your feces, the root words of this. Now the color, natural light, look up in the sky, right? What do we see? Blue, but the different color spectrum that we're going to encounter throughout the day changes. And these blues and yellows in the morning, this blue and yellow color profile is important. At sunrise, when the sun is coming up, that is the most important time to look at it. Now, don't obviously just stare into the sun like Donald Trump when there was that. Did you guys see the when we had like the eclipse or whatever it was? I don't even remember what the hell happened. A year, 2 years ago, whenever that was, and Donald Trump squints and just looks like bare-eyed at the sun. Don't do that, right? But go outside and get natural light, and the quality of that light, the color profile is so important. When the sun is at that low solar angle. I'm looking at Alexis's comment. It was the eclipse. Yeah, it was a hilarious picture. It's funny. As much as I just disagree with, I don't know, 45% of everything he says. I mean, we're talking like, you don't disagree with 100% of anything anybody says. I mean, it's who's like the worst person who's ever lived. I mean, Hitler's like the easy example. Let's skip him. Let's say like Idi Amin or something. How much do I disagree with Idi Amin? 40 to 50%. If we're being honest, the worst people in the world also said some good things. Just like people, murderers and whatever, they also, maybe they served homeless people once. There's nothing that's wholly bad, which to me is the most boring thing in fiction, is the all-out evil Voldemort kind of character. I say that as, I like Harry Potter. You say the same thing about Lord of the Rings, right? Sauron, he's like all out evil Dark Lord. That is so boring because that doesn't exist in real life. So Trump, who cares if he's Sauron or something? I don't know. I agreed with like 55% of what he said, but I sort of miss his craziness of having it be so prominent. I mean, I'm good riddance, but I'm not good riddance to the craziness that it's in a Michael Jackson situation. I definitely miss Michael Jackson. I don't miss the trauma cause. Yeah, who cares? Let's move on. So the color is very important. Go look at the sun, not in the way that Donald Trump would. Now, why are these colors important? Not how How are these colors important? Well, photoreception, and we're going to process these colors in a slightly different way, and it's going to help alert the suprachiasmatic nucleus. The mechanism is a little bit clear. The why, the purpose, right? The sort of intention of this stuff. Let's take a um, evolutionary biology perspective here and say, um, it gets cloudy sometimes. It's very cloudy outside. The total amount of photons, the lux, Lux, the lux, an amount of a quantity of light energy, right? The lux, that's going to change. And it's, hey, Ross, where you are. I'm just going to keep going to Ross. It's probably like Oregon, Ross, where you are. It's so overcast and blustery and dreary, and there's 1,000 acronyms. There are synonyms. There's acronyms. I'm sure there's acronyms too. There's 1,000 synonyms that I could use for this weather, and the amount of lux is going to be depleted a little bit. Well, we still have to have information about sunrise and the beginning of the day. So color is going to be very helpful in providing additional information, so that our brain can receive this information. Our brave brain can understand the chronology of our lives and reset its timer. Now, outdoor light is so much more potent, so much more important, so much more powerful than indoor light. I could have picked 1,000 articles to say this. Here's one. Again, just like I said earlier, that science article. Here's an article that shows the comparison of lux. Again, just this sort of energy, this light energy, a quantification. Outdoor light levels as compared to indoor light levels. I mean, it's hilarious, the difference. So you get up in the morning, you turn your screen on, you look at your iPhone, you open up your computer, you turn on your kitchen lights, turn on the TV, whatever it is that you do in the morning. That's nothing. Does your suprachiasmatic nucleus keep a running tally of the number of lux it receives? Sure, yeah, it's going to do that. It's going to sum those things up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's going to keep counting, right? Like the count from Sesame Street, but it just goes and goes and goes and goes and really gets that thing fast. Yeah, sure, it'll count these things up and interpret that, but you just don't get that many indoors. You really don't. You kind of have to go outdoors. So open field, here's under the shade of a tree right here. So you're outside at 9 a.m. Here's noon, 2, 4, whatever. Open field, under the tree. Okay, here's like inside. I mean, it's like nothing when you're inside. Even when you go through a window, you can go get these apps, right? Science with a smartphone, measure the light with lux. You can do this. Measure the lux and go stand here. Don't, not in the moonlight, but have that be the sun, and go stand over here when the sun is coming in. It's a lot lower than if you go outside. Just through glass, you're in a car, and through the car window, it's going to be lower. All of these barriers, although it's just light shining through, if you just get outside, it only has to be for like 10 minutes, 5 minutes. If it's really sunny out, hang out for 5 minutes. If it's all blustery and gray and dreary, and spell gray both ways, and what, if it's like overcast and sure is ominous, and sure, all these go outside for 10 minutes, 12, 15, I don't know. If it's just like black, Mordor clouds, I'll spend 20 minutes out there. But indoors, I don't know, you spend all day before you get that kind of a lux load. And also, it doesn't equate perfectly in terms of like, well, it's 1,000 lux inside and 10,000 lux outside. It takes 10 times as long inside to get that experience. Not really, because the load is not calculated quite in the same way. In the way, think like glycemic index and glycemic load. If you eat 100 carbohydrates over the course of 2 hours, as compared to 100 carbohydrates in 5 minutes, what happens to your insulin response? I mean, it's wildly different. And so go outside in the mornings. I usually do. I don't always, but I usually go out in my backyard and stand there and whatever, walk and put on an audiobook and stare like Donald Trump directly at the sun. Now, if you wear glasses, don't take them off. If you wear contact lenses, don't take them off. They're like, well, they're glass, and that's going to, cut down the lux, because what is it that Harry Potter's, I don't know, why the hell did Harry Potter need glasses? I'm not the first one to notice this. 100 billion people noticed this before I did. That doesn't count. 100,000 people. 1 million people at least noticed this before I did. You're at a magic school, Oculus Reparo, whatever. Why didn't you just fix your, optic chiasm or something, your eyeballs? What are your retina? What the hell is the matter with you? Just fix it with your wand. But if Harry is going to go outside and get his morning lux to set his circadian rhythm, to provide information, synchronizing information, to his suprachiasmatic nucleus, if he's going to go outside, he doesn't need to take off his lenses, because what is it that these lenses are doing? Well, they are focusing the light on the retina, right? They're not scattering the light. Your car window, your living room window, these things are not prescription lenses that are focusing. I'm going to sneeze, so plug your ears. Okay, I hope it didn't just deafen anybody. As I sneeze directly into the microphone. So glasses unless it's just like fashion glasses with glass in them. Okay, well then take that shit off when you go outside, but leave that stuff on as you go outside. Now, for the longest time, here's a science article, 1998. For quite a while, people thought it's not just your eyes. Blind people, you're straight up blind. They can't see shit, right? Blind people can reset. Thank you, Kendall, for the blessing. Blind people can experience an updating of their suprachiasmatic nucleus, their circadian rhythm. They can set that clock, that biological endogenous clock. So maybe you have photoreception, extraocular photoreception that's not in your eyeballs. That was the philosophy. And what this article found was that the back of the knee, the popliteal space, right, what gets all sweaty when you lie in the fetal position, like your knee pit, that space, like, wow, light shined here, can update the suprachiasmatic nucleus. We can set our endogenous circadian clock with the back of our knee, with our knee pit. Okay, that was 1998, and this is an experiment that should have been done, and they should have published it. It may have been retracted. I'm not sure if it was. What I do know is that since then, people have retested this and retested it to try to validate it, and everyone who tries to validate it, this thing invalidates it. It's been overturned. It's not true. Now, if it is true, there is no evidence that it is. In people, in human beings, there's no evidence that it is. And you and me and all of us, and your mom and dad and their mom and dad and their mom and dad, and whatever. There's no evidence that we have extraocular photoreception. And so people will say this because it was a huge paper in one of the hugest journals in the world. Big finding. And then nobody cares, when the story is, when it's like an op-ed piece, it's like 3 weeks after somebody's huge story that's like, oh, it turns out we were wrong, or whatever. Nobody reads that story. You only read the huge news, and so people still think that there's extraocular photoreception, something to calibrate it. That does not mean that blind people cannot reset their circadian rhythm, but the light has to pass through your eyes. If you're going to get oxygen into your lungs, you can breathe through your nose, you can breathe through your mouth, but you better get that shit into your lungs. Right? You gotta get it in your lungs. You can't just let me, instead of I don't know, let me inverse flatulence. Let me just fart in and let me get some air up into my colon or something. That doesn't do anything. That doesn't help you, right? Or like, yeah, you has to go down your trachea and pass into your lungs. It's the same thing with light. It has to go through your eyeballs, right? And the optic nerves and the suprachiasmatic nucleus and get up to that, right, those intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. Now, you can be blind and have these things sensing light. And so this is what I was just saying of, blind people are capable. Now, I don't know the extent of this. I haven't done any serious delving here into the breadth of oh, circadian updating in blind folks. This isn't an area of mine that I've explored, but the melatonin, what we have, blind people, visually normal folks, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, when we stimulate this thing with light energy, with lux, when we're exposed to light, we suppress melatonin, the release of melatonin. Melatonin is one of these things that's going to tuck us into bed at night. It's going to read us a little story, right? It's a little mommy and daddy tucking us in, and don't let the bed bugs bite, all that stuff. That's what melatonin is doing. Not really directly, but it's sort of establishing an environment for you. It's setting the scene. Now, nonphotic, which I mentioned earlier, that's where we're done with light. We're going to come back to light as we're talking about getting into bed at night and how we mess that up. Lots of people have blue light glasses. I have a pair of blue light glasses. I'm not wearing them now. I didn't wear them this morning. But if I'm on my computer at night, I'm going to put them on. And so this idea of blue light, you want to get your blue light in the morning, whether that comes from your computer screen, whether that comes from your iPhone, whether that comes from the sunrise. Ideally, it should come from the sunrise. The quality of light that comes from the sunrise, that is what your brain cares about. Your brain doesn't really care about your iPhone and computer and stuff. You want to get those blues, especially the blues, but the yellows, the blues and the yellows, and overexpression of that to wake you up in the morning and set your biological clock and say, all right, pineal gland, here's my timing signature. Stay with me here. Bear with me. Here's when I want you to tuck me into bed at night. But at night, you can totally mess that up. And so, feel free to put on your blue blockers in the evening. I do when I'm, with lecture prep or it's research or something, and it's like getting into those wee hours. And I want my pineal gland not to be in hiding because I'm going to be transitioning into bedtime soon. So, nonphotic. We'll talk pineal gland on Friday. Meals. You're eating. You can set a circadian rhythm here. Get up and have your midnight meal every night. I don't know if you go to bed at midnight. Let's say you go to bed. Let's say you go to bed with the sun and you get up with the sun. You go to bed at 7 and you get up at like 6:30 or something like that. I mean, nobody's doing this, but in the middle of the night is actually your midnight. It's the middle of your night too. But you get up to eat at midnight at 1 a.m. or something like that, and you look in the fridge and you get that light exposure, and whatever, you nurture your munchies, and then you go back to bed. You're going to, aside from the dopamine complications that you might have just caused by the light exposure, we'll get to that on later, probably not on Friday, maybe on Friday, but you can establish a circadian rhythm where, it's mealtime. And if you're very consistent with food, I'm not saying do this, but if you're very consistent, like every day at 8 a.m. I eat, well, you're going to find yourself hungry right before 8 a.m. And every noon exactly, I eat every day. And when spring forward and fall back and whatever that nonsense, that horrible nonsense is that kills people. We'll talk about that later. You don't update your own clock with that. You just say, well, now what used to be noon is 1 o'clock, so now I eat at 1 o'clock every day. You'll get hungry, shortly before those meals, and you can wake yourself up, with meals. Exercise is another phenomenon where you can help reset your circadian rhythm. You can help reset your clock by exercising in the morning. Or at what time you want to sort of become alert. Exercise works. How effective is it? Well, it's nowhere near light, but it does help work in shifting your circadian clock. Social stuff and sort of these emotional engagements and anticipation and anxiety and all this stuff. This can shift your clock too. It's a little bit hard to control some of this stuff and understand it fully. Drugs are easier to understand. These are two completely obvious ones. Melatonin. You take a bunch of melatonin and you go to bed, right? All right, my pineal gland, I just put way too much light in my eyeballs, but I still want to go to bed tonight. I actually want to fall asleep. Let me just put some melatonin in my mouth and see if I can make my way through. I can still fall asleep anyway. And then stimulants. I was gonna like mess everything up. Most drugs, a drug of a pharmacological, a therapeutic dose of a drug is probably going to have some effect. Pretty much any drug is probably going to have some effect on your circadian clock. I mean, I'm not saying every single thing ever, but just even if it's just some little microscopic effect, but these are sort of macroscopic effects. And at the end, I'll talk about uses of these, whether it's caffeine, whether it is Adderall, stuff like this, I'll talk about at the end, and use of melatonin. But how do these things work? What is the mechanism for these? The intergeniculate leaflet, this seems to be for non-photic stimuli, exercise and stuff like that, non-light. That really seems to be what's doing it. This down here is a passage from this article, but there's plenty of articles on this topic saying, all right, what is this non-photic? There's tons. Here's two of them. But what is non-photic stimuli? What is this actually doing? And in part, serotonin, right? But so you see the suprachiasmatic nucleus above the optic chiasm there. There is the intergeniculate leaflet right there. And this little pathway of here's your exercise, just to here in your thalamus, right? So you're up in the thalamus. We'll talk more about the importance of the thalamus later. But for today, we're done with circadian rhythms from the basic understanding of what they are, about a diem with an M, about a day. We're maybe 24 hours and 15 minutes, something like that. We go over a day a little bit and we reset that day. We continuously calibrate. I guess continually, we repeatedly calibrate that that cuckoo circadian clock with light stimulus. The suprachiasmatic nucleus is constantly error correcting. And then we also have a little bit of food, of exercise, of drugs, maybe a little bit of social engagement, stuff like that, that non-photic wakefulness. Now, on Friday, we're going to talk about the pineal gland, pineal gland, and it's melatonin and what affects it has. We'll talk about adenosine. This is what's called sleep pressure, or sleep appetite, a little bit more colloquial, or sleep hunger, or sleep pressure is what it's actually called, and what caffeine is doing to that thing. So if you have your coffee, why does coffee wake you up? Well, there's some different effects of coffee, of caffeine, not just coffee, but caffeine in general. It's a non-selective phosphodiesterase inhibitor, so those metabolic effects, let's mobilize some energy substrate, stuff like that. But also, I'm going to talk about its relationship with adenosine, this chemical that builds up and builds up and builds up in your brain and creates sleep pressure, and then temperature and its circadian rhythms. So that's all for 2D. Do we have some questions? I'm looking at the chat box, and the last thing anyone chatted was Kendall saying, "Bless you." And I forgot I sneezed. And I'm like, oh. My back.
Yeah, you're back now.
Okay. Did I vanish for it? Did I like freeze and vanish?
Yeah, okay. You like glitched for a second.
Okay.
And then you like dipped for like 2 seconds and you came back.
Yeah, like my whole computer seemed to shut down. It's just like nothing. And then, hey, I'm back. Nothing happened. I hope it recorded. Otherwise, Ross is going to be pissed. Okay. Any questions for today? I seem to.
I got a question about
Yeah.
when you're talking about the blind, were you talking about like people who just have some sort of complication where they can't see, or like if somebody had a severed optic nerve?
Yeah. Yeah, a really good question. Yeah, if you don't have like eyeballs, you're like missing a retina, or you have a severed optic nerve or something like that. Nah, I don't think you're going to get circadian updating in that context. But if you have visual impairment where you can't actually register sight, the architecture is there. But you can't visualize things. That's the type of blindness I'm talking about.
Okay.
Really good question.
And then also the exam, you said we can do it a few times.
Yeah.
Is that possible to not do it at the scheduled time?
Yeah,
Or...
I'm just gonna set it up to be like, here's a week or whatever.
Okay. Yeah.
And just take it when you want, several times. I have no idea how hard it's gonna be. The last one was like super impossible, and I had no idea as I was writing it. So, but I'm just gonna do the same thing. I'm just gonna create an exam and just take it, and then like, oh, I got these ones wrong. Let me learn this stuff and go retake it. And at the very end, the last stuff I'm going to talk about is sort of my reasoning for doing this class in this way, where it's not just total stress load. The allostatic load and kind of over expressions of cortisol and whatever. It's also kind of sleep schedules, and let's just try to like, what is education supposed to be? Learning. And so I think this is probably the most effective learning, where you can learn without having like agony and disastrous. Van Ness mentioned I have a twin. A twin is new to me. maybe they're just two Courtneys. I mean, like personalities that like I come off in two different ways or something. Or is there like someone else? Is there like somebody else who's just very me-like?
You and my dad look like 20 years apart, the same person.
Oh, that's funny. Your dad is like a super handsome, amazing guy.
Yeah.
Totally. You have an amazing dad.
I'll bring him in, but I sent pictures today. All right, I showed Van Ness yesterday because I saw him. So.
All right. That's funny. I am happy. I will feel complimented. But yeah, I'm trying to just make the class as learn friendly and minimizing sleep deprivation and stress, overexpression as much as I can.
So yeah, I was just asking because it's 5 a.m. on Saturday morning for me, which is okay. But
no, I don't want people to do that. I'm going to talk at the last lecture again when I'm saying here's all the stuff we're doing wrong and what we can do better. It's like that stuff where I don't want people to. I don't want to sacrifice brain health so they go to class. That's the opposite of class. Like,
oh no, that's all right. I got up early, but I got a tennis tournament as well that day. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd be glad to get to sleep.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get out of here. And I hope the first thing recorded after my computer, logged off and stuff. I'm pretty sure it all recorded. I'll get whatever I have recorded posted though. I'll see everyone on Friday.